Welcome to Big Blend Radio's Nature Connection Show, a podcast covering nature, wildlife, science, and the environment. Welcome to the Nature Connection, everyone. May 10th, today, is World Migratory Bird Day, and we're very excited to welcome science writer, naturalist, poet, and adventurer Charles Hood on the show to talk about his new book, and it is super awesome. You guys, you've got to get it. It is called Nature at Night. Discover the hidden world that comes alive after dark. It is out now through Timber Press. You can also go to his website, charleshoodbooks.com. He's got over 20 books, and he's traveled all over the country and around the world. He's all about nature, wildlife, and birds. And so welcome, Charles. It's good to have you on the show.
Well, Lisa, thank you so much. I'm really happy to be here and indirectly to meet your mom. Hi, Nancy. And it turns out we overlap quite a bit besides some of I've lived in London, but also Africa, of course. And then now I just realized you're in Asheville. Well, that's my dad's town. My dad's side of the family is from there. So yeah, we probably have been in the same airport on the same day at some point in the last 30 years.
Yeah, I love this because you really have been all over. Kenya, you were a nature guide. Nancy did that. And she would be on the show you with right now, but she's hanging out with two puppies that will kind of take over the show because they're a little loud. But she guided tours over and taught people. And she got the job pretending because they told her, well, animals go. And everything went wrong on the first one she did. And she just kept going, well, it wasn't like this last time, but she got away with it because she knew so much about wildlife. How did you end up being a guide in Africa?
Well, because the person I had hired to be with got malaria and had to go to the hospital. And so I decided, I prepared for this trip. I could actually step in. I'd read quite a bit and I just studied the pants off myself on all these different bird watching books. But it goes all the way back to seeing a movie called Born Free, which some of your audience will know, and some it's a little bit beyond their years, but about rescuing, lions in Africa, and it was made into a movie. And I saw that as a little kid and like, oh my gosh, there are people that actually work with animals for a living. There's, I got to find out about this. It was just astounding.
It's amazing, right? I mean, and it's really about animals in the wild. And I think that's what's so great about your book, Nature at Night, is, we used to go on safari at night. It was especially sundown, and then sunrise is always cool. And I was talking to a friend the other day. We were going to a swamp. I'm like, we have to get there by sunrise. As soon as that gate is open, we want in. And she goes, why do you get up early? I'm like, dude, that's when you see everything. And at night is really cool because you have this whole other landscape. And as we travel through parks across the country, national parks, state parks, all of them, and there's wildlife in every park. I don't care if it's a historic monument. There's going to be birds living somewhere that you didn't think. But at night, there's this whole other landscape that I think travelers sometimes forget, people that are nature enthusiasts, or there's a little fear about that. Like, I still have to do a swamp tour. I want to go to Okefenokee just to see gators at night. So that's my thing. But do you think we kind of forget that, or is it fear? Because you kind of talk about the fear of the night, like the boogeyman's going to come get us.
Right. Society has really trained us to be afraid of the night and by extension, afraid of things that are dark. Like a black dog is scarier than a white dog in popular. Werewolves are never white. I always wonder why there's so many colors of wolves in the world. Why are all the werewolves always black? But the idea that something is out there to get us, or it's menacing. We better have our deadbolt bolted, and we better have our security lights triggered. So if a little possum walks by, we can turn on all the lights and scare the bejesus out of the possum. And that's all just cultural training. Obviously, our ancestors going back 200 years, could walk around at night. Otherwise, none of us would be here. You have to be able to walk on the path home from the fields back to the village. It's just reality. So yeah, we're afraid of the dark, and we don't necessarily need to be. I don't want our listeners to take it too casually. Like, do bring a flashlight. Maybe have it on a dimmer setting rather than a brighter setting, so you can let your eyes adjust. Don't step on a snake. It's bad for you, bad for the snake. So have some sense of what your environmental, situation is. But really, the night is a safe place to be. The dangerous part is driving on American roads to get to the the trailhead. That's the dangerous part.
Actually, you're quite right. I've seen things. Yeah, I've rescued people in Joshua Tree who thought they could drive at night in through the park. It just, it's going at night. I remember a friend of mine that she had this farm out in Southern California in an area called Fallbrook, and she had an organic farm growing lettuce and strawberries and everything. And she let things grow wild. And she had a black widow in her bathroom and it was her friend. So like she didn't kill things. She let nature do it. So I know a lot of people go, well, that's a little too far, but she was just respectful of it. And, we saw so much happen on that farm. And one night we were bringing the cat in and I used a flashlight and she had a fig tree that was just, overabundant with figs. It was that time of year. And there were just these sea of yellow eyes sitting in this tree and they were all raccoons. So when we think about nature at night, sometimes we could just start in our backyard, right? To kind of get familiar of the animals that come out at night, like raccoons. I have a friend who has fox and opossum that hang out with the feral cats in her backyard. It's interesting. But there are animals that come out at night that we can just maybe start in our backyard to get a little cozy with it, right?
Sure. I live in regular suburban tract home, plain old regular America, but I planted some native bushes here in my front yard, got rid of my grass and put it in xeriscaping. And within a day, I began to see a transition. And so some of the photographs in my book, I just took by stepping out the front door. There's a sphinx moth pollinating a desert willow. I just took that picture, not 5 feet from my front door. That if we just give ourselves a chance, nature is all around us. We simply have to provide a little bit of habitat, a little bit of cover, and then just to pay attention and look for it. You mentioned Fallbrook. There's lots of great things there. That used to be a beaver corridor back in the 19th century, but there's still dozens and dozens and dozens of species of birds, salamander, frogs, snakes that can be found in and around just Fallbrook. This is down in Southern California or around Tucson. Watch the bats come in and pollinate the saguaros, for example. And you mentioned black widow spiders. Here's something kind of creepy maybe for our listeners or maybe not. But back in the day, men got more black widow spiders than women. And this is because I don't wish to be indelicate, but in an outhouse, you sit on a wooden plank and your gentlemanly bits are dangling down in there. And there used to be spiders. So historically, like from say 1800 to 1900, there were more. This is not because they were provoking the spiders. It's just the way the anatomy works. I hope that doesn't creep everybody out, but just
That's
an outhouse
funny.
is like a barn, right? It's
I know.
where
I'm
the
like,
spiders
that
want to
cracks
live.
me up. No offense,
Yeah.
no pun
Yeah.
intended either, but that's funny. Well, there's more things that happen in outhouses, and I remember when we lived in South Africa, we lived we lived on a piece of land where you go in a generated, there was no electricity, okay, where we're on the boonies and farm country, but also nature was prevalent. We had a rookery in our backyard, where egrets would come at night and roost, or a roostery. I don't know. Is it a rookery or a roostery? But, we had like everything hang out there. And if you had to go potty in the middle of the night, you're going and the generator's off at that time. And things did like to hang out in the outhouse. Outhouses. No, yeah, things happen. Things happen in outhouses. I've seen black mambas in an outhouse. That's not cool. Like when you go in and then you close the door and the black mamba is actually they can sit in places that you wouldn't believe what snakes can do. Like in a corner up at the top, you go to close the door and there's a snake in your face. But anyway, I don't want to scare people about going to outhouses. Not that
Right.
there's many left.
We need to temper this with a little bit of statistical reality. So we were talking before air, one of my friends that was raised in South Africa and now lives in Thailand. And he's Paul Carter, and he's been out 1,000 times at night looking for snakes and mammals and just hiking at night. And I always joke with him, well, how many times did you die in that 1,000 nights? And of course, the answer is 0. He had a few times when he almost stepped on a snake. He does take some precautions, but the reality is it's fine. No, but nature's not out to get you. Just use some normal precautions. Yes. And if you're going into an unfamiliar space, you want to check with a flashlight, for spiders, for snakes, for for a rusty nail, anything that could really impede your progress.
Yeah. And honestly, and I love that we're talking about this because I should be dead by now by the amount of snake encounters I've had and stupid ones. I've picked up a night adder thinking it was a rock. I've stepped on a puff adder. Not cool. There's all kinds of stories. I could do a whole show just on snake experiences, rattlesnakes going over my feet. But you know what? They don't want to do anything unless it's really big. A lot of times, like a rattlesnake, I believe, it got one or two bites that it can actually do in its life, and it doesn't want to do it on you. That's a waste of its venom. They hold on to it.
Yeah, it doesn't want to do it on you because you're not a prey item. At least, rattlesnakes don't eat people, so therefore, right.
Yeah.
And so.
Yeah. So it's just kind of, every snake is different, but it's when you start to learn, it becomes so exciting to see them. And, I wanted to touch on it being World Migratory Bird Day. And this is the first thing I think we can really touch on, from the backyard. Number one, I think it's so important that people understand what we do with light pollution. And, we leave all our lights on outside in case of the big boogeyman. And what that does is actually ruin a lot for wildlife and birds and insect species that, they all exist together in the web of life, right? So I was talking about this with a friend and they're like, what do you mean birds fly at night? I'm like, yeah, they're flying over you right now. So turn your lights off. They're like, what? So can you touch on that a little bit? Because I think this is the friendlier part for people to understand what these birds go through when they fly.
Yes, it's absolutely true. There's lots of kinds of migrations, including in the ocean, the seabirds have their own migratory patterns, or some birds, like in North America, the mountain quail, they migrate by walking. They walk from the higher altitudes down to the lower altitudes and then back up again because of the snowfall covering their food. But most birds that do migrate, and we're talking about going from Europe down to Africa or from North America down to South and Central America, they're just trying to follow the food. So they came north during the spring and summer when we have an abundance of insects, and then when that diminishes, that food supply diminishes, they go down to the lovely tropics. And in fact, for North America, we could really ask, we have 50 species of warblers, but aren't they really Latin America's warblers, and we only have them a few months out. They spend more, orioles and these things spend more time actually in the Central American jungle than they do in North American forests. So they're not really our birds the way a lot of people think. But yes, most of the migration is typically at night. They're feeding during the day or resting or both, and then using nighttime. There's, hawks can't eat them at night. It's cooler. Sometimes the wind patterns are more advantageous depending on the direction they're going. And they're navigating using moonlight, starlight, the magnetic field of the earth. Perhaps they can hear the distant oceans. They've got some hearing that we don't have. So it's a whole combination of tools that a bird needs to migrate. But yeah, they're typically going many thousands of miles, and typically a well-lit building in the middle of the city is a disruption, something that they are not trained to process visually, and they fly into it or they go the wrong way, kind of thing. So yeah, fewer lights, that makes it a safer place for migratory birds, and fewer lights saves your electrical bill, and fewer lights means that you don't ruin your own night vision when you step out to see the stars.
Yeah, and the dark skies are such an important thing. I did an interview with Harun Mehomedovic. He's a night photographer and a filmmaker, and he did a documentary with Matt Damon on, I think it was called Fire and Ice, or Ice and Fire. And he was really talking about the importance of this light pollution that we have. And he was like, we look at climate change, it would actually help us against climate change or mitigate climate change. And he was just talking about how we actually lose entire species because of this kind of pollution. Because like if a moth, it's just that's a whole conversation, but it's just so fascinating, all these little things that we can do, just a click of a bulb, and looking out maybe with your flashlight is better, at night, that kind of thing. We don't need huge lights. And now we have webcams and things that that have night photography, they can use infrared and things like that. So it doesn't really affect the animals, when they walk by or hang out and eat in your front yard or backyard. So we have a lot of tools now that really don't hurt when you go out at night, right?
Sure. You can get a trail camera. They're only $150. And I know that's not a trivial amount of, it's not a tiny amount of money, but it's not that bad for if you own a home, or you're renting even, but you could just put a trail camera and they work off of body heat. And so you can find out about the foxes, raccoons, skunks, possums, deer, maybe even a bear passing through your neighborhood, through your backyard. And you don't need any lights. It takes flash photography using an infrared flash as well. It's completely visually silent, if you don't mind me mixing my metaphors. On average, in Europe and in North America, we really have kind of an unhealthy relationship to light. I always give the example, like, I'm going to get into my car and the car wants to turn in all the lights. And I don't, if it's nighttime, I actually don't need the car to have like the dome light on and the doors and everything. I know where the steering wheel is. It's exactly where I left it the last time I was in there. I know where my seat is, but by the car turning on all the lights, it's ruining my night vision. So I'm a bad driver. I actually don't, it's going to take me a while to acclimate to looking out into the nighttime. So we don't need nearly as many lights as we have. We have parking lots at malls that are lit all night long, even though the mall's long since closed. And studies have shown if we had half as many lights or a third as many lights, there is not an uptick in crime. Those lights, it's not like the parking lot is lonely. Like, let's turn the lights on because the parking lot needs a friend, there's no reason to have these lights on.
Well, it's interesting too, because at the same time, nature creates its own light, and the moon, right, does that for sure. But also the plants, like Datura. You've got Datura in your book, and I got all excited about that. We used to have so much Datura, and we used to go out at night, and you could see the Datura as like it's a light plant at night, and moths would go in, big carpenter bees would go in and hang out in there, just get covered in pollen. But as soon as the sun really comes out, it's like, that's it. Good night. I'm going for siesta time. The blooms, they're like, I only come out at the end, between dusk and dawn, So the Datura plant, don't smoke it. Some of you may know about Jimson weed, but when we lived out in Joshua Tree area, there were at least once a year some incident of the park police having to pick someone up thinking they could smoke some Jimson weed. Not a good plan, but
right. So genus Datura is found throughout the American West and into Central and South America. It's a white trumpet-shaped flower, and lots of flowers, of course, are red and yellow, and they opened up during the daytime. But they're competing for pollination with all the other red and yellow flowers. Whether they get bees or hummingbirds or beetles, whatever it's going to be during the day, there are a group of plants that say, hey, there's a whole lot less competition at night, and we don't need the colors. You can't see red at night nearly as well. So they are white. And it is true, all of the whole genus Datura, which is also has that nickname, Jimson weed, loco weed, the entire plant grouping, the entire genus, it is psychotropic. There are compounds in it that are hallucinogenic, but only expert shaman or the Native Americans who grew up knowing how to manipulate the dosages should have anything to do with it. It is illegal and it is lethal, toxic. We are telling our listeners, don't be messing, don't lick it, don't smoke it, don't rub it on your private parts, y'all. Datura is not
that's
for
not going to help
us.
the black widows either. No,
right, it's not going to keep the black widows away. Leave it to the moths and just enjoy it.
We actually have used Datura. So when we lived out there, we had like this beautiful garden. We were growing all kinds of native plants. And of course, a lot of people think you can't garden in the desert. Well, not true. And 29 Palms areas, which is right outside Joshua Tree, it's high desert. So you know about that. High desert is like you get really, really hot. Like you don't ever need a hairdryer, y'all. You just walk outside. In 3 seconds, your hair is dry. It's great. But when it gets cold, man, it really gets cold. And you do get snow once in a while, which is really beautiful out in that area. But Nancy was out gardening and she just threw her back out. She comes crawling into the house. I'm like, what? So she gets in the bathtub, and we had a Kundadera on the show, and it's shaman, Mexican shaman, and he was talking about using native herbs and plants. And in there, he was talking about Datura, and he was really warning. And so this is still with a warning. I don't know if I need to go beep, beep, beep or whatever, but don't do this unless you know what you do. We followed the directions in his book. And all she did was put a leaf in the bathtub, and it's a muscle relaxer. She got out of the bathtub standing upright after that. So I'm just saying it does have medicinal properties, but you need to follow expert advice. And he knew what he was doing, and he wrote a book on it through the University of New Mexico Press. So it's okay. It was safe. You need to have that book. I'm just saying. So don't do it at home without that book. But she was healed. Isn't that pretty cool? See, nature provides.
Nature
So
provides.
I thought that was
Absolutely.
she does, but you need to know. But also at night, you know, I remember in Kenya, like you wouldn't see certain species like bush baby that easy, like little bush babies. Have you seen a bush baby?
Yes, they are nocturnal, and you just one of the tricks that the people that look at animals at night, there's now using these thermo imagers. They're sort of like a heat-seeking monocular, and animals are warm-blooded, so they're typically warmer than the ambient air, and they glow hot. And so, if you want to find a bush baby up in the brush, if you use these thermal imaging monoculars, they show up, and that's also true in Central America, South. If you want to find a sloth, now other things glow hot as well, like a termite mound or a wasp nest. They're as white as a sloth, but you have to just take your binoculars out and check. But yeah, there are lots of ways. There are bat detectors you can put on your smartphone and hear the ultrasonic calls of the echolocating bats made audible for our human range, and you can even
Mm,
identify them the way you can identify a bird call. We were talking about migration. People are now
hmm
tape recording, just putting like an iPhone in a bucket on your roof and tape recording the bird calls as they go over, because the different species are keeping in touch with each other through these little contact calls of, "Hey, Joe, I'm over here. Yeah, I'm over here. I'm going along. Are you going along? Yeah, I'm going along." And you can pick those up just with a regular, if you have a fancy recorder, that's nice, but a regular iPhone can do that. So that's one way we know what's passing overhead, is you can see it on radar, but you also can hear it with your iPhone. And that's true for bats. We can find out how many bats are flying overhead by just monitoring their calls and bringing it into a range of human hearing.
Ooh, this is so exciting. I want to go out now. Like it's not dark. Can it go dark now? What about fireflies? Do they get to be part of night animals to watch?
Don't you?
Well,
You
they're
must have seen
insects.
so many different kinds, Lisa. You and your
Hmm
mom. I mean, they're in Africa, and now you're in the eastern seaboard. Now they're in North Carolina. I don't get, where I happen to live. I don't have fireflies, and so yeah, they're in the book, and I found some great illustrations that I liked. And there's way more species than I ever appreciated, and they're all doing different kind of patterns of blinking, and there are kinds that deceive others in order to predate them. But it's just, don't you love it that these things are free? You don't need a
Yes.
subscription. You just need to have the gumption to go out and look.
We hadn't seen them because we lived out west when we first got here, and then until we started, well, we were in Florida for a while, but never saw them in Florida. And then when we went out, we were in Kentucky, and I remember seeing one going, "Oh my gosh." And I think we called them something different when we lived in Africa. They weren't fireflies. I think we called them lightning bugs. Um,
Right. Same.
I
Those are the same group of behaviors, not the
oh,
same species, but it's the same thing.
oh,
The same phenomenon.
okay. Yeah, and but we'd get really big, I mean, the bugs. Oh, okay, I want to tell you about Kenya bugs, like what we used to do. And you could probably, it's a big no-no now, but we were very novice. And so there's a lot of learning. And this is why I really appreciate books like yours. Number one, you have got amazing photos in your book. They're just like, you just want to sit and like look at the photos and you start reading and it's fun. Nature's fun for those of us who are like, nature geeks, but you make it fun and interesting and you bring history into it. And, it's just such a good read. And it's one of those that you'll just like want to, I don't know. Honestly, your book is like for me, sit down with a nice glass of wine and just really take time with it because it's a fantastic, just, it's immersive. You know what I mean? Because you bring so much to the table with it. And I love, you have a picture of some of your notes of how you take notes. And I'm like, this dude's like mind mapping all kinds of cool stuff. I think, have you published your notes like that ever? Like as a book? Like those
Not
kind of
as a
notes?
standalone book. I have been in some art journals being featured for your readers. Yes, I do keep a journal that's a little bit more, polyphonic. I don't know. I don't use, it's a blank page and I just keep adding material to the page until it's illegible and full. And that includes, the beer label, Kingfisher beer. Hey, maybe you don't remember that from
Yeah,
talking about
yes.
Kenya. I have
Yes.
a beer label next to my description of an odd moth or a little watercolor sketch of a flower or something. Yeah, it's a creative space for me.
Well, going back to the fireflies, we were in Arkansas, and I got to give a shout out to our friends. We're at Tiffany's Bed and Breakfast. It's outside of Hot Springs. Um, they're on 52 acres. It used to be a mining camp. Actually, the town is called Bismarck, but their land is actually what that town was. And now the forest has like reclaimed itself, restored itself. You can go in and there's these trees that are bent that, they say, Native Americans use these trees to kind of let others know when they're migrating, hey, there's water here. So they have these creeks running through, and, it's amazing because they have two different kinds of forests on one property, right? Which is awesome. And you sit out on their porch and they get tons of hummingbirds and cardinals and all of this. But one night we're sitting at cocktail time looking out, and here comes the fireflies. And this is the first time both Nancy and I've seen fireflies in this magnitude in this country. And we're like, whoa. And then at that time, a barred owl couple came out, and they were teaching their owlets to hunt for the fireflies. And every night we're like, none of us wanted to go to bed. Then it was like too dark. And then we're like, okay, none of us, we're supposed to go out at Hot Springs at night, and like, no, we're watching the owls. Thank you very much. It was such a special thing to witness. But, I think part of seeing things at night is also to seek those places, especially if you're new, like being at a bed and breakfast and just sitting it reminded us of Africa, because you can be kind of in, like, people want to go glamping and things like that, who are not used to roughing it out in a tent. There are places where you can experience this, right? And see nature at night. We used to watch wildlife at watering holes in Kenya, from like treetops and places like that. I don't know if you got to go there, but there's places.
Yes, and we're just going to make one footnote correction for your listeners. The barred owls, whose call is "Who cooks for you?" Who cooks for you? The barred owls were not eating the fireflies, Lisa. They eat larger prey. They're actually looking for a house cat, or a possum, or a raccoon, or a roof rat.
Okay, so what were they doing? They were just the little one kept flying down, and then they would go down, and then they would go up. So right. They weren't teaching. We thought, okay, well, see, this is why we need naturalists on the podcast, because that's all. We didn't have your book yet. We're sitting there going,
the young have to just learn how to fly, right? Just like learning how to ride a bike. You just sort of wobble along the sidewalk. You're not really going anywhere or doing you're not doing wheelies. You're just trying to stay on the bike. So the young have to learn, they're not born able to fly, the first second they try. They hop around, they hop from branch to branch once they leave the nest, and then they sort of plop onto the ground and try to get back off again. But there may well have been mice, if there are fireflies or other, it's a larger, more intact community than just one insect. And so there were lots of things that you couldn't hear or see, but that they, for an owl at night, typically, like if we imagine it's noon and I say, well, can you see the car, or can you see your car keys? Like, of course you can. There's noon. For them, nighttime is as bright as daylight is for us, because their eyes are just that good. And then with an owl, their hearing is so good, they can hear a mouse, like a barn owl can hear a mouse in total darkness. They can and it's got asymmetrical ears, so it can triangulate like two different radar stations. So they don't, they were quite likely either practicing or they were hunting something, but they could have been hunting lizards, frogs, snakes, but they were not trying to eat
Arkansas
fireflies.
Snakes.
Just imagine the size, a barred owl's the size of a poodle. It's not going to survive by eating something the size of a mosquito.
Okay, so we thought it was using the fireflies as like a, teaching station. So that's okay. But then at the same time, we always think, oh, you're going to teach your kid in the daytime. That's our human brain, right?
Right.
That's exactly. I'm so glad I brought this up. This is so cool. I'm going to call them and tell them, hey, this is what's going on, so you can tell your guests, because people go there just to watch the birds. Because it's like you went to Madeira Canyon. You have a photo of a bat at the feeders, and Madeira Canyon in Tucson, just south of Tucson, is known for hummingbirds, broadbills, and broadtail hummingbirds. Bear. There are definitely bears up there.
Pumas.
And
there are pumas in that canyon. Ringtail cats.
Yeah. Yep. Ringtail cats and trogon birds. Oh, that's a sweet find if you see them. But you got a bat there too, and that is a killer photo, man. You got its little tongue.
So
Is
we
it
think
its little?
of bats wanting to into our hair, which they don't. They want to eat insects. But some bats eat fish. So in the Amazon, for example, there's a species of bat that specializes in listening for the little minnow-sized fish break the surface of the water tension with their fins, and then they swoop down with sharp talons and a big webbed pouch at the end of their tail, and they grab up the fish. Some bats eat frogs, but there are plenty of bats that are nectivorous. They're coming like to the saguaro cacti, which have big showy white flowers, and they are
Mm.
eating the nectar, and then they're pollinating at the same time. But in around Tucson, these bats ain't stupid. So like, why do I bother going all the way over to those saguaro, and right here behind someone's house, they've left their hummingbird feeder out all night long, and I can just hover. They come in kind of a swooping, flopping dive and make a braking turn. They don't hover quite as well as a hummingbird, and they can zap their tongue out. These tongues are like a pipe cleaner. They've got little rugosities on them, and just slurp up a big mouthful of nectar in that microsecond of pause, and then peel away like a Top Gun fighter peeling out of formation, and then fly off. And
Oh,
so, yes, I was able to get a picture in Madera Canyon. I do recommend the Santa Rita mountain range and the lodges there. There's a bunch of them, for nighttime animals. Absolutely. Great fun.
ooh, yeah. That's Nancy and I will sit out at night to watch. No matter where we are, and a lot of times, um, you know, we car camp a lot as we travel, and that's how we see fox and all kinds of things that others don't really see because they're like, all right, all nighttime is for sleeping. No, it's not if you're out in nature, man. It's time to look and see what's on the move, what's hunting, what's going on. I do want to go to, I know that you were also up in the cold world. This is so cool. You were in Antarctica, on the artist in residence program with the National Science Foundation. And I've interviewed a couple of artists in residence from that same foundation, that same excursion. And I know there's a collective now. And I don't know if you've met any of them, like Glenn McClure. He's an amazing musician. Michelle Schwengala, Schwengala. I'm going to get her name wrong. I'm going to get in trouble. She's a fiber artist. I don't know, but they did that too. And, so I wondered, did you see anything at night when you were up there or out
Well,
there? I shouldn't
the
say.
summer Antarctica program, it's their summer, our winter,
Mm.
just for logistical reasons. And
It's
so it is
still
light
winter.
24 hours a day. So the only nighttime, you need
Okay.
blackout curtains when you go back to back to the barracks to sleep. And yes, there is an Antarctic collective of artists, that does meet, and I am part of that. And this is for your listeners. Always fill out the little piece of paper. I wanted to go to Papua New Guinea when I was a student. I didn't have any money. I wanted to go bird watching in New Guinea. And so I filled out to be maybe I shouldn't admit this on air, but I filled out a form to be a Fulbright scholar to translate tribal poetry. And by God, as one of my professors said, be careful, you might get it. And so I ended up in New Guinea that way. And so, yes, I have been to Antarctica. I have been to the South Pole, as part of an artist project. And that is, I applied and won the grant. I don't know what to tell you. Like, it's
That's awesome. That's
pretty
awesome that
good. Yeah.
I think that's pretty darn good if you ask me. I mean, it's like, just do it. You know, when the opportunity knocks, it may not be exactly the way you thought it was going to be dressed. It may, that door may be a little different color. Just go for it because you'll still be able to do something that you wanted when you're there. And I mean, that's how we ended up in Africa. My mom got a job opportunity of the lifetime and said, all right, I'm taking my little kid. She can't breathe in LA anyway. And I was a year and a half and we got on a plane and apparently I wasn't supposed to be there, but we did when Nancy worked for Joy Adamson out in the bush um, and the rest was history. And we've been kind of animal addicts for the rest of our lives, and she was, and, from the beginning, but, you've got to take those chances to be able to explore as you can. But what about in these northern places, where you see all those different, like, the northern lights? We almost saw them when we were in Wisconsin. But the cloud cover was not going to let us see it. Does that affect animals at night? Those, amazing lights that we're all attracted to?
They might make hunting actually a little bit more difficult for a snowy owl or an Arctic fox because it is illuminate. For your listeners who don't know, you can actually hike by moonlight, of course, but you can also just hike by the light of the northern lights when they're really pumping away. I mean, it does illuminate the landscape. It could make it marginally more difficult for some of the predators, and then hence marginally better for some of the prey animals like voles or something or ptarmigan or something, whatever they're going after. But mostly the thing about the northern lights is they're just, again, it's free, it's cool, it's fabulous, and we are going into the solar maximum, as it's called. So the solar wind is at its 11-year high, and so for the next 12, 18, 24 months, whatever you want to pick, we are having opportunities for northern lights and, by extension, southern. We don't like to ignore our southern hemisphere friends. So southern lights, the aurora australis and the aurora borealis in the northern hemisphere, we're going to be in opportunities for them. It doesn't happen every night, and obviously you need a clear sky. It can't be cloudy for you to see this. But the way that the solar discharge works, we're in a great period. If you want to plan a vacation to Fairbanks or Helsinki, this is the year to go. Pick the moonless night, pick the time of the year when there's no moon. You can see that online on little charts, and plan on spending a week in Fairbanks and look at those northern lights.
Oh, that's, that's so exciting to be able to do and see. I have a lot of friends who've done like Norway and places like that. And one is like, she stayed in a tent in a field somewhere just to see it. She's like, it's cold, but I don't care. I'm doing this. These are these exceptional things that we can do as we travel. So that's I'm bringing the travel in because I know a lot of our listeners are travelers and park travelers. And, sometimes everybody wants to go to the Louvre. No knocking on that. But to add these kinds of experiences into your travels, is just incredible. I always worry about how we're losing species, and so when we were in Africa and in Kenya and South Africa, and now we see photos, today, we don't see as many species around a watering hole as we used to. And that's what's in our storage unit in Tucson is tens of thousands of wildlife photos of wildlife and like the Serengeti, and just, it's just so, it seems like we're losing, species. So,
but I'll assure our listeners that, yes, there are definitely impacts from climate and from habitat degradation and so on. But at the same time, having now been, to Mongolia and Borneo and Madagascar, all these places that I, quote unquote, had to go to, air quote, had to go to these places to work on my book.
Had to.
Had to go. There is plenty of nature everywhere, and there's plenty of abundance left. And the number of species we have lost is certainly tragic, but the number that are still extant is a much, much, much larger number there. And yes, and there are plenty of tours. If you want to see animals, there are, the animal-based tours, or if you want to see the northern lights, just go to Tromsø and you don't have to camp in a field. You can just take the bus, go to, Reykjavik in Iceland and take the bus tour out, and they'll show you the northern lights and bring you back to your hotel. I have a picture in the book of the northern lights taken from a cruise ship. And that's something that my wife suggested that we do. Like, oh, sure, you need to go on a cruise. I guess I can come along and put up with fabulous food and a luxury suite. Sure, let's give it a try. And then they maneuvered the ship so we could see northern lights from an ideal position.
And you're on the water, but there's loss, but at the same time, there's also old species being found. So this is why I'm saying we're in this very interesting time. And I think climate change is actually going to bring back old species. Does that make sense? Like the way the weather is?
Well, I'll say climate change will alter the distribution of species. Climate change won't bring anything back, but there are things that we thought we had lost that maybe we just were ignorant about as humans. So we just hadn't been looking in the right places. And there will be nature in 50 years or 100 years. It just may be in a different pattern of distribution than we have now, or that we feel is ideal. If we were to make a value judgment, we like these plants and not these others, but there's certainly going to be animals and plants. They just are going to be a different mix of species.
And look in the water too, right? That's the other thing.
Right.
Look in the water.
Right.
And a pleasure having you on the show. There is so much in this book. And everyone, again, it is out now by Charles Hood. You can go to charleshoodbooks.com, but also you can get it through Timber Press. Again, it's called Nature at Night, Discover the Hidden World That Comes Alive After Dark. Thank you so much, Charles, and happy World Migratory Bird Day.
Thank you, everybody. Goodbye.
Thank you for joining us here on Big Blend Radio's Nature Connection show. Keep up with us at bigblendradio.com.